Welcome, everyone. This is the Shooting It Straight podcast with Justin Jackson. I am producer John. We are so excited to be here with you all tonight to talk some UNC basketball. We know it's a really busy time right now for UNC news. We know that the UNC women's soccer team is playing a national championship game right now. So there's a lot going on with Carolina. So we appreciate all of you taking some time to talk UNC basketball with us. Shout out to everyone in the live chat. You guys got here early tonight. Sean Crowley, someone beat you into the chat. Shout out to, I think that was Jim. Yes, Jim, who started things off in the chat earlier. We want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors as well. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt, the best place for UNC gear and apparel, and Congruity HR. Thanks to both of our sponsors there. Justin, let's get into it. It was a busy week for UNC basketball, 2 games that they split, a lot to talk about. Where do you want to begin? Let's maybe start with talking a little bit about the Georgia Tech game and some of your takeaways from that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Georgia Tech game you can look at from a bunch of different angles. I think for me, the biggest aspect is them getting back into the win column for everybody's, confidence. I guess to some extent, just being able to kind of get a win in the Dean Dome, walk out with a little more, confidence and excitement. I think for me, going off of last week, which it's funny because I don't have social media on my phone, but my wife was, I guess, telling me that the clip that I had made last week, a lot of people had seen it and liked it and were making comments about it and insinuating that I was talking about the coaching of what was going on. And nowhere in that clip did I mention anything about the coaching going on. So I think for me, going off of last week, kind of the theme of after that Alabama game of just me not really liking where their fight and competitiveness and the competitive spirit that they had coming off the Alabama game. I think me personally, I saw a lot more of it in this game against Georgia Tech. Yeah, it was a 3-point win. I think somebody said the line was like 15 and a half as far as that goes. So not necessarily how people expected it to be. But on one hand, Georgia Tech is always a terrible matchup for us. My junior year, when we actually ended up winning, that was our first loss of ACC play, was going to Georgia Tech and losing to them. And then, there's been other teams that have struggled with Georgia Tech as well. So I think the matchup wise was, Georgia Tech always comes in and plays well. But for me watching it, defensively, they were way more active. I mean, they held these. I think they held Georgia Tech to 31% from the field and 30 from three. So that's not a small feat at all. So there was definitely some intensity level that was raised. The pressure was raised at times. Defensively, it looked like they were more locked in on that end. I think for me, looking at this game, offensively was kind of where the question marks were. Looking at their turnovers and just kind of sloppiness at times on offense, I think was kind of the issue and the reason this game was a lot closer than it probably should have been. But I saw what I wanted to see, and that was just more fight, and more want to, if you want to use that term, out of this team. So, excited to see that. Now let's see if we can kind of button up some more things kind of going into, this next game and then into some big games coming up.
Yeah, Justin, I'm glad you brought that up, your Instagram clip there. It went viral. A lot of people responded to it, commented on it. And I think the message really resonated with people because you were talking about seeing this team play with more presence, more passion. And that's why we named the show what we did tonight. We're looking for this North Carolina basketball team to play with more passion, more pride out there on the court. And I agree with you. I think there was a lot of positive steps forward in the Georgia Tech game in that category. We're getting a lot of really good questions in here. So I want to give a quick plug for the chat as well. If you're watching us here live on YouTube, we're live every single Monday night be sure to post a question in the YouTube chat. We'll get those. We'll also answer a few questions from the board as well. The message board had a few questions for us. I'm going to bring in this question early on because I think this has been a common area of, talking to people that people have been curious about. This question is from Bart Watts. I'd like Justin to opine on what they can do to get some level of post contribution. Claude and Lubin can post up. We cannot rely on what we've seen. He calls out Ty Claude, who did not play on Saturday, calls out VAL. I would add Jalen Washington in there. He's a pretty prolific back to the basket player, especially, when he gets the opportunity like he did last season. But it feels like this year he just hasn't had that chance. What do you think about the post contribution, Justin? And it maybe is the back to the basket game really missing from this offense and hurting this offense in the half court?
Yeah, I mean, I think for Bart asking, that's a great question. Bart had said, I don't think this game gave anybody confidence. I think first and foremost, that game definitely gives players confidence just being able to see a win. You go a couple games of losing and you start to kind of overthink a lot of things. So even though it was a game where it might have been sloppy and we probably should have won by more, you come out with a win, you walk away with a win against an ACC opponent. That's a big game.
Mhm.
But to his question, which was a really good question, um, I think there has to be something that they get from an inside presence outside of the guards driving into the paint. I think whether that means that it's throwing it to the post or playing out of more pick and roll and getting the bigs, whether it's switches or whatever it might be, then going against that matchup. The more that I've kind of watched this team, I think they have very capable players down low. I think, like we've talked about, the strength of this team is the guard play, though. And so I think that's why you've seen a lot more of the open spacing, the 5 out type of offense, high pick and rolls, kind of getting the bigs in that kind of situation. Because at the end of the day, you want to play to the strengths of your team. And the strengths of this team, even though at times it's been a little suspect, is, kind of the guards that they have. And now these, a guy like Ian and Drake getting involved as well. So I think that's why you see more of that. I think we definitely need to see more presence inside, whatever that might look like. I think the stat was in the first half against Georgia Tech, all 31 points were scored by guards. And so that right there definitely that's not sustainable against a really good team and going forward in the season. So whatever it might look like, whether it's playing maybe out of the, short corner with a guy like Jalen Washington who can face up more. Because I think the reason that Jay Wash kind of gets a bad rap at times is because I don't necessarily think his true strength is back to the basket. I think he is more of a face up, whether it's a jumper, more finesse type of big. So playing to that strength would be more playing out of short corner situations, maybe a little bit off the block to where he has space to face up and do whatever he might need to. But I think there's still ways to play out of the offense that they have now and still get something inside. Whether that is you've seen quite a bit of these guards getting downhill and maybe just drop offs, or like I said, finding mismatches maybe that are inside as opposed to just getting a guard with a big and now attacking that mismatch. But I think there does need to be something that we see kind of a player get involved on the inside that can give some sort of just a mix up sometimes. Whenever it's just these at the end of the day, smaller guards attacking these bigs consistently. You saw it in the Alabama game. It's tough for the smaller guards to just continuously go downhill and attack the bigs and try to jump into their chest. Because bigs, at the end of the day, they're taught to just protect the rim. So, I'm sure that there will be some adjustments. I think that there definitely needs to be something inside, and there's definitely capable and talented enough players to do that, whether it's Jay Wash, Van Allen, or if when Ty Claude is back, somebody like that can, do something every once in a while.
It's funny. Last week, Justin, we spent the whole time talking about the defense, and now here we are a week later. We're talking only offense here. But I think there's a lot to talk about with the offensive performances the last two games. North Carolina shot less than 21% from three-point range in consecutive games for the first time since 2016. I should have found those games. Those might have been some of your games there, Justin, the poor shooting performances. And then the turnovers offensively really showed up on Saturday against Georgia Tech. Season high 18 turnovers. It was the most turnovers by the Tar Heels since they made 18 in a 4 overtime loss against Alabama in 2022. And I think, the big talking point there for the turnovers was Elliot Cadeau. If you look at the box score, he had 7 turnovers against 4 assists on Saturday. He also didn't have a super strong offensive performance, so only 9 points from him sort of compounded that a little bit. When I watch Elliot, I see a player who is really trying to make things happen for this team. He's trying to do everything he can to create offense. And when you're doing that, you have to kind of push the edge a little bit and kind of push the envelope and throw some riskier passes to try to make things happen. Let's talk a little about Cadeau, though. Is that what you're seeing from him, and what are some other things that you're seeing with Cadeau's point guard play?
Yeah, I think going back to your comment, or going back to kind of a takeaway from the Georgia Tech, and this will lead into the Elliott question that you just had.
Mm-hmm.
I think whenever I watched that game against Georgia Tech, we talk about defensively, the intensity was a lot better, right? And it's, I think that's the start for this team, is consistently playing on that end of the floor, because one of their biggest strengths is getting out in transition, right? So when I looked at kind of the numbers, North Carolina out-rebounded them 48-37. It's a positive. That's one of the things that we come into the season, we weren't necessarily sure how the rebounding would go. Fast break points, they got them 16-5, which anytime you're really, in my opinion, anytime you're over 10 or 12 points, fast break points, then you're in a good place as far as pace goes. Points in the paint, 34-22, right? So UNC won that. And so I think even though offensively it was a struggle, they kind of got back to the strengths of this team, right? Getting stops, getting out in transition. I think obviously a lot of those points are the guards getting downhill and finishing. But then, when I look at somebody like Elliot, right? Like he did struggle, and we'll get to that in a second. But I think what I've really liked from Elliot the last couple of games is you see a lot of those outlet passes straight to getting it to a guard that's already up the floor, right? And I think as a point guard, whenever you're thinking of, okay, how do we get this team extra possessions or get easy shots, that's one of the best ways to do it. It's kind of old school and very fundamental, but there's a lot of times, there's a lot of drills where you might do a lot of kick heads. I know we did a lot in practice, and I'm sure they do it, but just outlet passes, right? Outlet passes and getting up the floor quickly. And I think you're seeing that a lot from Elliot, which is allowing this team to get out in transition a lot easier. Now with his struggles, I think it all starts with kind of I think last couple games, it's been a lot of, I don't want to say lackadaisical, but it's almost been a lot of careless turnovers, right? From the whole team, but also from Elliot. And I think when I look at Elliot, so his last 5 games, he has 23 turnovers to 22 assists, which those numbers aren't obviously very great. But now this is also with a lot better competition in the last 5 games, so we have to take that into account as well. But the first 4 games, he had 27 assists to 7 turnovers, right? And those first 4 games, he was playing as if he had taken a huge leap forward. Like, this is the guy that the ball needs to be in his hands. This is the guy who needs to run the team. And I think for Elliot, a lot of the confidence that he has comes from setting guys up, and running the team and getting guys shots and getting guys open looks and things like that. So when he's turning the ball over, in his mind, that's all he's thinking about the next few possessions, you know? So like if he gets an open shot, he's not really able to step into it fully confident and clear minded because he's already thinking about the 2 turnovers that he had, the couple possessions before. So I think for him, it just starts in just taking care of the ball, right? Just taking care of the ball, getting guys open looks, setting guys up, getting downhill, attacking when he needs to attack. Because that just opens up everything, and then he's able to play so much more free, and that's what we saw in the first few games compared to the last few. So I think that's the biggest thing for Elliot. Once he gets back to just taking care of the ball, having that positive assist turnover ratio, then everything else just opens up for him. So I don't think it's necessarily anything as far as we need to change schemes or things like that. I think you are seeing teams start to scheme a little bit different against him. I think you're starting to see a lot of guards go under ball screens and basically force him to shoot jump shots a lot more as opposed to being able to get downhill and use his athleticism. So that's kind of an adjustment, just kind of seeing where he can attack, when he can step into shots confidently. But the turnovers, I think, is the biggest thing that's kind of kept him from being fully Elliot the last few games, and who we've seen kind of, at the start of the season.
You mentioned fully Elliot there. I think another player that fans have been talking a lot about is RJ. And have we seen RJ fully be himself so far this season? I was looking at his stats earlier. He's averaging 18 points a game, 4.2 assists per game, but the field goal percentages is really what stands out for him. He's shooting 35% from the field, shooting 24% from the three-point line, a big departure from last year when he was shooting almost 40% from three. We actually got a question about this from Knowledge Seeker 360. First of all, great commenting name there. Really like that. Also a new name here, so thank you for watching and joining the show live with us tonight. Knowledge Seeker asks, we need to stop giving RJ a pass. How is the reigning ACC Player of the Year shooting 35% from the field? Justin, I know you've talked about that in the past with expectations and the pressure on RJ. What do you take from that question there from Knowledge Seeker? What kind of comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a good question. At the end of the day, RJ coming back and kind of taking that, on his shoulders as far as being that does come with the territory, right? But there's a few different things that I think fans watching don't fully understand unless they've been in this position, right? And so when I see RJ, yes, he's not shooting the ball as well as everybody expected. He's not necessarily playing as great as we expected. But let's put some things into perspective. Last year, I'll continue to say it was a historic year, right? It's a year that you rarely we probably won't see another year from a guard like that for the next 10, 15 years, right? So we got to put that into perspective, right? He had an unbelievable season, ACC Player of the Year, jersey in the rafters, first team All American, all of those, right? So then you come back, you say you're coming back, you come back being the number one guy, which he ended the season being the number one guy last year. But if we really remember, Armando was really that was the big headliner every single game that they went into. So you lose Armando, right? Which was a guy that inside took so much pressure off you because they couldn't necessarily just leave Mondo on an island against the majority of bigs. So he's getting all of these, once they start doubling, he's the one that's kind of on the receiving end of these kickouts with teams and rotations and just getting easier open looks more consistently. Now you come into this season and every single team you play against, doesn't matter if he's shooting 35% or not, this next game they go into against La Salle, he's starred at the top of the scouting report, right? And at the top of the scouting report, it says, get the ball out of his hands. I guarantee it, right? Because they know the pressure that he can put on a defense if you allow him to get going. So you have that. You have, once again, all the pressures that come with coming back and being the reigning ACC Player of the Year and all the preseason accolades and awards, and praise that he's getting. So you have that. Then you start the season off not as good as you want to start, right? On top of all that pressure. So then you have people like us saying, man, when is RJ going to get back and on track? So it's just a lot more pressure going on. And inside his head, I guarantee you, he's thinking about it way too much, right? Like I've been there and I've done that, right? When I was in that situation, I've talked about it before. I felt like I had to prove myself to be the ACC Player of the Year. I had to prove myself that I had to be an All American, right? As opposed to just going out and doing what had already proven me to be. And so for RJ, I think that's the biggest thing. Like RJ has to just get back to just being RJ. And if he can do that with everything else around him on this team, I think this team is in a totally different position. But for this team to get to where they need to get, he has to get back to that. So I think if that helps everybody as far as putting that into perspective, as a fan, you kind of watch and you're just like, man, this guy is supposed to be, ACC Player of the Year, first team All American. Why is he not playing well? Right. But it's like there's so much more that goes into it that we don't really see from the outside. And if he is kind of thinking about it too much, it just puts all of that on basically steroids. And so the next miss that he has, he's thinking about it. The next turnover that he has, or next bad game where he doesn't shoot the ball very well, like he's going home thinking about it. And for me, I would just tell RJ, just go play, just go hoop. When he goes and hoops, it opens things up for everybody else, and it'll just make it easier for him in the long run. So, great question. But I think that's kind of, to put everything into perspective, that's kind of what RJ is kind of going through right now. And so, I think he's shown that he can do a lot of great things. I think he'll find it and he'll turn it right around. And then we won't even be, we'll be laughing about kind of the struggles that he had.
Absolutely. I want to take a quick second to thank and acknowledge our sponsors for this show. First, want to talk about Johnny T-shirt, which is the best place for Tar Heel gear. It's a Chapel Hill tradition since 1983, and they are 20-year partners of Inside Carolina. So make sure to check them out on Franklin Street or check out their online store if you have to do any Christmas shopping, anything like that coming up for the Tar Heel fan in your life. Check out Johnny T-shirt for all of those needs, and we appreciate them for supporting this show. Also want to give a shout out to Congruity. They are the leading provider for Tar Heel business owners' payroll, HR, and employee benefits needs. You can get a free payroll and HR assessment by emailing Matt at Congruity. There's more information about them on the Inside Carolina website. You can check them out there as well. Going to take a quick second, let the national guys pay the bills, as Tommy likes to say, and then we'll be back with more UNC basketball talk. We are here live on YouTube Monday night talking about UNC's win over Georgia Tech and the UNC basketball team at large. We're also keeping an eye on the UNC women's soccer team. Shout out to those gals as they're playing for the national championship tonight in Cary. I have a little bit of a bone to pick with the chat as well. Some of you guys posted about some football news. You nearly gave me a heart attack because I thought the news broke during this show. So, there's a lot of stuff going on here in the chat. There's some football talk, some basketball talk, some soccer talk. We appreciate all of you guys for joining us tonight. 72 joining us live on a Monday night to talk about UNC basketball. So thanks everyone for joining us. Justin, UNC had been on a little bit of a losing streak before the Georgia Tech game. This was a team that came in with a lot of pressure, a lot of expectations, and yet they fell to Auburn, to Michigan State in Maui, and then they come back and they have that really, really tough loss to Alabama last week, that large loss. We've talked a lot about some of the pressure on individual players, but what about from a team perspective? What's it like to be a part of a team that maybe isn't living up to expectations, or maybe going through a little bit of a losing streak? As a player, as a leader, Can you walk me through the kind of experience there, and what are some things that you might do to help get the team back on track?
Yeah, I mean, I think whenever I see kind of the start to this season, it resembles my freshman year quite a bit. I think we lost. What did we lose? We lost double digit losses. I know for sure. Um, and like there were some games that we definitely should not have lost. I think the biggest thing, like losses happen. It's just the way sports in general work, right? Like losses, you don't win them all. Um, and I think losses sometimes can be the best teachers. Um, but obviously, you'd love to also learn from wins. And I think with this team, it's funny. I was listening to, I think it was Randolph Childress who was doing that was on the broadcast for the Georgia Tech game. And he had made a comment basically about, and I think you're seeing this a lot in all of college basketball, but with all of these transfers, it was already tough enough to get freshmen kind of, engaged and involved and, into the team and meshing with the team early on in a season. um, but then you add all of these transfers that are coming from different schools and different systems and different coaches, and it just takes time, right? So you've got a brand new team that's got young guys that are trying to figure out. It's got, yeah, they're older guys, but they're coming in from a Vandy and a Belmont and you know those type of places that don't have the same pressure and the same expectations as North Carolina. And then you go on to a gauntlet of a schedule like North Carolina has started off on. And, I think that's kind of why you're seeing a lot of these struggles, is because it's not necessarily a fully cohesive unit as of right now. And, some of that's not necessarily their fault. Some of it is just a matter of, hey, we got to get used to really playing with each other. We got to get used to, there's certain things within a game where, yes, communication, I think, has been a struggle this year for them, whether it's defensively or offensively. But there's certain things, the more that you mesh with another teammate, that you don't even have to communicate and they already kind of know, right? Like if I've played on teams where, there's just crazy athletes, right? And so there's certain plays where the point guard might drive towards that player and they know it's an automatic backdoor, because he's just trying to cut and get to the rim, right? Like there's certain things that just go not communicated that's already known. And you don't really have that right now, other than like a Seth or a RJ or those three guards. And I think that's kind of why you're seeing, the majority of the time them kind of playing well with each other. But everybody else is trying to figure that, communication style out. So I think that's kind of what the issue is. I think the only way to expedite that process is by over communicating, whether that's on defense, whether, we saw in Maui, there was some miscommunications on defensive switches or what the coverage was or rotations or whatever. Sometimes you just got to over communicate, right? Like you got to let them know early, like, hey, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, or, pick right, switch before the guy even is up there to set the screen, So I think communication is always a key, whether that is a particular player, whether it's an RJ who's been there for a while, and Elliot who's, the true point guard, or a guy like Seth, who, in my opinion, has been the most consistent player on this team. It really doesn't matter who it is or if it's a team effort. It's just a matter of communicating, because communication is always, kind of the key of the entire game. So I think if they can do that, and the more that they mesh, the more that they get, used to each other and kind of are able to grow even more. I think by the end of the season, this team is going to look totally different than how they've looked, because we can never minimize the type of schedule that they've started out with. Even though they didn't necessarily get some of those wins that I think were kind of big for them, the strength of schedule that they've had to start this season is incredible. I mean, you just said it. They lost to Auburn, then they lost to Michigan State, and then come out of Maui and, oh, we've got another top 10 matchup in Alabama, right? Like that's hard to do. And I think if they're able to kind of clean some of those things up, they still have two really big games coming up here before ACC play really even starts. And so if they're able to kind of get those things, figured out, I think things look a whole lot different for this team.
Absolutely. Just to put a point on that strength of schedule, discussion, Ken Palm has a strength of schedule rating, and UNC's is the 7th hardest in the country. And this is a team that is not done playing challenging games. Like you said, Florida, who is a very, very good SEC team. You talked about it with Alabama. The whole SEC beat up on the entire ACC. So even that one, in context, right? You can kind of look at it that way. But Florida's a very good team. They're still on the schedule. And then UCLA. So two more. Those are the two more chances to play some challenging non-conference games. I mean, you can make an argument this is maybe the hardest non-conference schedule in the entire country. And that's what UNC is up against. There's a really good question we got on the message boards from Alex Ortiz 02. So I wanted to bring this question in. It's a little bit more of a defense question as well. On the defense, with our athleticism, but also lack of on-ball defending, would a zone, half-court trap, or full-court press not be better? You can even mix them up just to try to get a different look. That's something that we've seen teams do against UNC a lot this season, even on Saturday with what Georgia Tech was doing. What do you think there about some of the defensive looks that UNC could throw their opponents?
Yeah, I mean, I think switching things up for sure is, I think, a good thing at times. I mean, you've seen it. I mean, even throughout this season, they'll randomly throw kind of a jump trap in there for a few possessions, and then they'll pick up the pressure in the half court, maybe get a trap out of the pick and roll or things like that. I think I don't think that they have bad on ball defenders. I think that it's just consistently trying to stay in front of their man is kind of the issue. You've got a guy like Seth who, I mean, he can guard anybody out there on the perimeter. A guy like Elliot who's shown that he can guard whenever he really wants to. Um, Even though RJ is smaller, I mean, he can compete out there. You've got a guy like Drake. I think Ian is kind of the one for me that I kind of would love to see a little more with his athleticism and ability to kind of apply it to that end. But I think these guards have every ability that they need to be able to stay in front and guard the ball. Um, I think one of the issues, and I don't think it's necessarily a make or break situation, but the one of the issues is their second line of defense is kind of where they're weakest at, right? So whether that is shot blocking, my junior year, we didn't necessarily have shot blockers, right? Like it was Kennedy Meeks and Isaiah Hicks and Tony Bradley. Yeah, they were able to protect the rim pretty well. But there's other ways of stopping them second line, right? Like your rotations have to be on point, whether that's a guard or not. The guard has to come over and help early. You can I had some guys that were really good at taking charges on the second line of defense, right? So a lot of times in basketball, you're not going to be able to just stay in front, especially if it's a good guard or a good player on the perimeter. But that second line, the execution of whatever defensive scheme that you have has to be there. For us, it was always low man. Corner sometimes would kind of help to kind of slow the driver down. But I think there's times in this defense where, okay, they get past the first guy, and then there's nobody really causing any contact or anything until they're already, at the rim laying it up, or they're too low to where they can still hit our bigs and still finish. So I think that's kind of where the situation is that second line of defense being able to come over and cover up for those guys whenever maybe they do get past them, and then the guards, taking a real effort and trying to stay in front of the ball, and like people say, guard your yard. Because if you stay in front of the ball, then you got to worry about any of those rotations and help side defenders.
I like this comment from Chief Cooney as well. I apologize if I mispronounced your YouTube name there, but take charges since we don't have shot blockers. I think that also gets back to some of what we've been talking about with playing with passion, being willing to be the first one on the floor for loose balls, be able to put your body on the line, take charges. All of that goes in to creating a really good defense. We're going to take a very quick diversion from our usual content on the show here because there's been a few questions about it in the chat. So there's a big basketball commit who is picking a team, a big basketball recruit committing to a team tomorrow, number one player in the country. And we have someone who has a little bit of experience with the recruiting process and what's that like, what that is like. So I looked this up. March 4th, 2013, the headline, Justin Jackson commits to UNC. We have to give you credit as well. You were a top 10 recruit, just like AJ, who is committing tomorrow. So we're not going to talk about it from necessarily like a recruiting perspective or an analysis perspective, but from a people perspective, Justin, what's it like to be on the cusp as a recruit of picking a school, and what are the types of pitches that you might have gotten from UNC back all those years ago, that kind of final closing pitch? Can you just give our listeners some insight into what that's like from a recruiting perspective?
Yeah, I mean, that was what, 11 years ago now at this point, going on 12. I think it's obviously way different. Like you said, it's totally different now. I wish that I had some expertise in recruiting right in this era. But during my time, I've been blessed to have two parents that took a lot of that load off of me as a high schooler. Pretty much every call was kind of filtered through my parents. It'd be at that time, I think the rule had started to change to where coaches could call you, or the rule was maybe they could call you after a certain date or something like that once you reached a certain age. I can't remember what the rule was, but those calls, whether it was my dad or mom saying, "Hey, you should probably call so and so," from at North Carolina, it was Coach Robinson, who's now at Arizona, but he was the guy that I talked to the most. So, whether it was them saying that, or once the live period or the recruiting period started where they could call you, they would call my parents, and then I would get on the phone if I really needed to. So everything was filtered through that. And thankfully, coaches kind of knew that my family didn't really stand for any of that, the cheating that goes on, and hey, we can get you this if you come here. So we never really dealt with any of that. The reality is that there was stuff like that happening, and now it doesn't even matter because the highest bidder is basically who's going to get these top guys. But it was a cool process. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and act like it wasn't. I was definitely blessed to be able to talk to and communicate and connect with a bunch of, unbelievable coaches, and ended up deciding there. I think from the AJ perspective, like I said, it's a little bit different. I think it's going to be for him, it's basically a 6-month rental. And so that kind of changes things for me coming out of high school. I really didn't even have my mind on going one and done, even though people might have had that perspective. But North Carolina is where I wanted to go because I love North Carolina, right? It didn't matter if, they weren't paying me anything but a tuition check and a stipend every month. But now it's just different, right? AJ's probably going to go. I mean, heck, if I'm him, I'm going to the highest bidder too, since I'm probably only going to be there for 6 months and then go to the NBA. So, obviously, hopefully, North Carolina has a chance. I guess we'll see whenever he makes his commitment. But yeah, recruiting is always an interesting time, and I can't imagine the recruiting now. From what I'm hearing from other sports, it's agents involved, and you don't even talk to the player; you just talk to the agents and the managers and stuff like that. So, I can't imagine being a coach trying to communicate with players nowadays. It's probably a wild time. Wild time.
I thought you were going a different way at first with that. I thought you were going to say, I wish I was a recruit right now because there's some different things going on. But I really appreciate your answer. I think that's a really throwback answer, and what a lot of our viewers and a lot of college basketball fans love about college basketball is some of the things that you hit on there. To close us out tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about the week ahead and the La Salle game. North Carolina plays on Saturday back in the Smith Center. Let me double check the time on that game. The La Salle game is Saturday at 4 o'clock on the CW network if you're looking to check that game out. It's also exam week for UNC, so it's a little bit of a less of a basketball only time. The players are also trying to finish up their academic semesters. But Justin, what does a good week of practice and preparation look like ahead of that game for you? What are some things that you would be emphasizing in practice? And, what does a successful game week look like to kind of tweak some things, fix some things before that non-conference game on Saturday?
Yeah, it's just consistency. I like to say it just in life in general, but in sports it works too. Just stacking good days, right? Like so, every practice you want to get a little bit better. Every time you step on the court to work out, a little bit better. So I think that's probably the biggest key when it comes to like detail oriented things. Um, I think it's a matter of, taking care of the ball. I think obviously that was one of the biggest things this past game against Georgia Tech. I remember in practice, players used to hate it. But it would be second loss of ball. So it was basically they would keep track of your turnovers within a practice. And if you turned over the ball twice, the whole team would have to get on the line and do a half court down and back. Just kind of reiterating the importance of taking care of the ball, how important possessions are. Um, and that's true. I mean, these possessions, they become more and more important, especially the better and better teams that you deal with. So I think that's one thing. I think for everybody involved, it's kind of getting, the confidence back, the flow back, kind of energy back as a team, and just kind of getting back onto a good rhythm. I think this game is honestly perfect, uh, especially right before going into, the two games right after that in Florida and UCLA to kind of, hem up some things, get some things kind of worked out outside of practice where you're just going against each other and you can't just go 2 hours of live play leading into, all of these games coming up. So being able to play against another team in a game setting to work on some of those things, I think is going to be really big. But that's just what I want to see. I want to see guys kind of get back to being confident. I want to see Elliot get back to making some of the incredible plays that he makes, playmaking wise and getting downhill and causing that. Seth being as consistent as he is, continue to, be steady and continue to grow his game. And then, I think, like I said, RJ is going to find it. Hopefully it's in this La Salle game and he can kind of continue that momentum. And then just everybody else, I think you got to give a shout out to Ian as well. Ian's been playing unbelievable as a freshman, kind of coming in with the no fear mentality. There's some shots that he shoots and I'm like, but it's also, you need a guy like that just does not care and is not scared of the moment. So, you've got guys like him, a guy like Drake who came into the starting lineup here recently, and then some of the other guys that hopefully can step in and make an impact. I really like what I've seen from Ben Allen. Obviously, he's undersized, so that hurts at times, and he can't seem to stay out of foul trouble. But I really like what I've seen from him, just from his activity level, rebounding, his screen setting, and getting rolling and being able to finish down low. So I think if they can piece some of this stuff together, right? We were worried about the offense or the defense. Now we're talking about the offense. If they can just kind of piece that together, especially heading into ACC play, I think this team looks totally different come, mid-January. I think they look completely different. I think guys start to figure it out. I think they start to really figure out how to play with each other. And I think it's a totally different story.
Gives me an opportunity to share my Ian Jackson stat since you mentioned him. He scored in double figures for the third consecutive game on Saturday, the first time a Tar Heel freshman has scored in double figures in 3 straight games since Caleb Love. So good company there for Ian Jackson. We appreciate all 81 of our viewers who tuned in live with us on a Monday night, despite everything going on. Thanks to the chat as well. The chat was awesome tonight. Lots of people getting in and commenting. Shout out to Tony as well. Tony, I'll throw your comment up there because you mentioned it. Be sure to hit the like button before leaving tonight and subscribe to the Inside Carolina YouTube channel. We are very close to getting to 25,000 subscribers, which is very exciting, a big milestone. So make sure you're subscribed. Justin, I'll let you take us out. Final thoughts, any final words of wisdom for our audience on this Monday night?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now, most current, it's shout out to those girls playing on that soccer field. Hopefully they bring it in, and I mean, even when I was there, hearing how many championships that women soccer program had won. I mean, I don't know why they're not talked about as the goats on campus. So hopefully they can bring another one back. So definitely cheering those girls on. And then yeah, there's a bunch of news going on. AJ's committing tomorrow. I hope everybody's saying a prayer and crossing their fingers. I think the football team is looking to hire somebody big, which would be incredible. And then North Carolina goes in Saturday to play, a La Salle team to hopefully button up some things. So big week for all North Carolina. So hopefully everybody can kind of pull through. And like you said, I appreciate everybody coming in tonight. And we'll talk to y'all very soon.